I'm going to read something that this is very poorly done on one hand, but on the other hand, it's a good example of what you could do with sex to put your point across without being very specific. A little bit of background. This is from a book called Anthony Adverse. This was written back, you familiar with that?
I remember the name, isn't it like the same days as Pilgrim's Progress and all those?
It's an allegory in that sense, but it's very different from Pilgrim's Progress. About 1,100 pages long. They made a movie out of it. At the heart of the story is Anthony Adverse, who is the result of an illicit relationship between this young girl who got married to this old guy and this sort of suave, swashbuckling type who meets her, and they have one meeting together. This is the meeting that they had together. Prior to what I'm about to read, he stops her coach, they have a prearranged meeting point, and takes her into this little glen and hides her behind these rocks and flowers, and they get to work. Meanwhile, this is happening. On the meadow above, the sound of the bees' wings continued growing a little deeper in tone as the heat of the day advanced. Right away we have the heat, and you know what that means, okay. By far the majority of these honey gatherers, okay, of the ordinary neuter and domestic kind for whom work was an end in itself. Here and there, however, amid this host of humble workers who took good care to avoid so dangerous a neighborhood, cruised a large male bumblebee, like a pirate or gentleman adventurer, covered with the gold dust of treasures he had robbed. Those, for the most part, seemed to have their nests or robber lairs about the tumbled stones of the old tower, where a kind of white cornflower trailed through the grass. From a fracture in the stone immediately above the little ledge, where the lovers had hidden themselves, a particularly beautiful specimen of this blossom had put forth. But a large black spider, who had also fixed on the same cranny in the rock for his abode, had fastened on this bud as a support for his web, and had succeeded in dragging it to the ground. In the shadow of the rock, the flower, which could open fully only in the brightest sunshine, still lay even after the noon had passed, with the small green tip of its maidenhead fastening its petals at the end of the pod. Attracted by so lovely and virginal a store of honey, a bumblebee lit upon his blossom, and after stroking his petals for some time as if he were in love, began to tear away the small green membrane that still defended it from his assault. You see, at this point, this guy is so graphic, it's unreal, but he's not writing about this man and this woman, okay? The petals opened slightly and began to curl, settling back as if it were upon his haunches and raking his body back and forth over the small opening. The bee finally succeeded in inserting himself into the flower. Here, as if in ecstasy, he dashed himself about. The flower, opening ever wider, trembled and drooped upon its stem. At the moment the spider, suddenly becoming aware of what happened, emerged from his nook and began to weave his web again across the bee. Yeah, he sort of goes overboard, but again, what he's doing, this is back when books like Forever Amber were considered hot stuff. And this would be hot stuff, and this is the kind of stuff like girls would exchange and wear. Ooh, you know what he's doing. Yeah.
If they got it, if they got it.
Who cannot get this?
Friday, did you get it? Remember that point.
Now, this sums up the whole story, because the spider, it turns out the young girl, her husband is this older guy who her lover considers him old and dumpy, but this guy is mean and sharp, and he gets this scene where he gets the lover and they have a duel, and within 5 seconds he puts his sword right through the lover's chest, kills him dead. This old spider, of course, is the old guy. And so you see how this guy uses elements of nature as opposed to giving you all the graphic details of what happened when the two went in a room. That's something you all might want to consider. One of the writers makes one mention in terms of cooking, and you'll hear from her today. And that's part of the foreshadowing that you can do. I'll speak about the peacock's wings earlier. A lot of times it's not so much as saying she had ruby lips as she looked at him, or his muscles seemed to swell and we knew. Sometimes it's describing something from nature that will serve the same purpose of setting up the foreplay. Smells, scents, certain music,